Welcome for this week's Rising Tide Foundation presentation. Last week, I think most people were here and got a chance to be introduced to the Hudson River School. If it's something that they hadn't been introduced to already, I think this was what Fox did was a most incredible introduction to the mind and purpose and mission of Thomas Cole, especially the misuse of Thomas Cole and the ideals of the Hudson River School by the eco-fascist movement in more recent years. So I thought it was just a really great presentation that sort of set the stage to infuse what should be two sides of the same thing, although in today's world they've been split apart: art and science, and the political manifestation of the healthy dance between art and science in the form of political freedom, which has always been what this has been about. So today we have a really interesting follow-up class. I'm really looking forward to this, by Alex Dimitrios, who has been working with Fox on the Space Commune geopolitical, geoscientific analysis website for some time. His work is impeccable. He's given some presentations to the RTF already that people can see in the description box in this video. Today's class is called Harmony versus Struggle, Frederic Church and Alexander von Humboldt's Legacy in the Age of Darwin. I'm looking forward to learning a lot. I got my notebook out like usual. Once the formal presentation is finished, we'll open up for Q&A, some dialogue, so people can just put their names in the chat box, and I'll call upon you accordingly. Alex, thank you so much. It is all yours.
All right, thank you, Matt. Let me pull up my presentation here. Current slide. All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Seeing nods? Okay, good. All right, so this presentation is going to be, I started out making this presentation about Friedrich Church, Alexander von Humboldt, and Darwin. And Fox had talked about last week. Fox gave a masterful presentation about Thomas Cole and his true legacy. What were his words as the founder of the Hudson River School and how that's being subverted today? And I wanted to go a little kind of a side story about after Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole died in 1848, 1849, somewhere around there. The Hudson River School, according to most accounts, was viable until around 1876, when it was finally killed off during the Centennial Art Exhibition in Philadelphia. We'll get into that. And what I wanted to look into were some of the other players involved, primarily Friedrich Church, who was Thomas Cole's only student. He studied with Cole when he was a young man, went on to have his own career, and what were Church's influences. And then what happened to Church's students? You know, Church lived until 1900, and after Church died, there really wasn't much left of the Hudson River School. It pretty much died out in the late 1800s, and it was only revived 100 years later to promote a Malthusian environmental message that was very, very counter and just completely twisted from the original intent of the Hudson River School, the original purpose. So I started making this presentation, and just to prepare you guys, you know, my original question about this, my original focus, I realized as I got into it that it's so much deeper than just Church versus Darwin, although that's a major part of it. And there's a number of other slings and arrows that were inflicted upon the Hudson River School by the British to kill it off because it was an incredibly revolutionary movement in America that sought to elevate the minds of the American people and to inspire them to think and not just feel or react like animals. So with that said, we're going to get into the presentation. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah, so yeah, you can find our work at spacecommune.com. I have a feeling we're going to be doing a lot of stuff about the Hudson River School because as we've got into this, we're realizing that the Hudson River School, the story of it is just like the story of America. There's so much to it, so interesting. And we do have to thank Matt and Cynthia and everyone at Rising Tide for bringing this to our attention because we, Fox and I had always assumed that the Hudson River School was just a, Gaia worshiping, transcendental, Gaia worshiping thing. where there, it was just going to be depressing to look into, but it's an amazing, amazing thing. So anyway, so Friedrich Church, he was Thomas Cole's only student. There he is. Got a nice mutton chop beard thing going on there. And he was born in 1826 in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, I believe, is a major center of the Hudson River School still. There's a museum there that has a lot of stuff from the Hudson River School on display all the time. I'd love to go sometime. He was known as the nation's first artistic celebrity. So Thomas Cole, he had some success. Friedrich Church had more success, and he was kind of a rock star in the way that you could be in the 1800s. So he was one of the youngest artists ever elected into the National Academy of Design. Here's one of his most famous paintings. This was Cotopaxi in 1862. This painting was done after he visited South America, and we'll go into why he went to South America. It's not of the Hudson River or the Hudson Valley, but this is the Hudson River School. There's so much, I think even on the Hudson River School presentation that Rising Tide did, you guys looked at this more closely, and we're not really going to do that. This is another painting he did later in his life. This is View from Olana in the Snow. And this is a familiar sight. If you ever have the pleasure of visiting Olana, that's Friedrich Church's estate in Hudson, New York. And this is a giant property that he bought with his earnings from his paintings. He built an amazing mansion, home for his family there. And then he worked with Olmsted, the designer of Central Park and of the Niagara Falls Park. And they landscaped extensively at Olana with these amazing views of the Hudson River, the Catskill Mountains, and these just beautiful hills looking out where you just have this 360 vantage point of the Hudson Valley. So this is a painting that Church did later in his life as he's kind of winding down. So for this presentation, I was running out of time, so at times I will heavily paraphrase what Pierre Baudry wrote about the Hudson River School, but I promise I'll be adding my own spin to it. So, but I do encourage people to go check out, just Google Pierre Baudry, Hudson River School. You'll find his stuff. He did amazing work about it about 20 years ago. So Pierre Baudry on Cole and Church, and these are just paraphrasing. So Thomas Cole and Friedrich Church, they were the first American artists committed to John Quincy Adams' Manifest Destiny. So Manifest Destiny is kind of a contested term because there's a real manifest destiny that was espoused by John Quincy Adams, George Washington, even James Fenimore Cooper, where there was a mandate for our civilization, the new world, the dream of the new world, to spread across the entire American continent. And there was an inherent mandate to do that. However, there was never a mandate to enslave Native Americans or to deal unfairly with them. And that's what ended up happening, especially because of some of our presidents that came in the 1800s after John Quincy Adams. But Cole and Church, they were bought in, and you'll see this from their influences, their networks. They were committed to the John Quincy Adams, James Fenimore Cooper vision. So this was a Republican cultural mission that they were on through the National Academy of Design. They wanted to create a distinctly American culture that was different from European traditions, that we were trying to turn over a new leaf here in the New World. They wanted to paint based on principles and not on competitiveness. So, there was a term about painting for bread versus painting for the soul, and where sometimes you're working just to get by, and then other times you're trying to feed your soul and make something that can have an impact and inspire other people. They cared about the spectator's role in painting, so the role of the viewer in the creative process was central. And this is through the use of metaphor and the sublime, where they're thinking as they're painting about what is this going to inspire in people? What thoughts can people have? And this is very different from making propaganda that has a utilitarian message of, go work in the factory, go work harder, go do this, go do that. It's more about, oh, how can I inspire people to think on a higher level and to have their own creative process. So this is just a slide about the National Academy of Design. It was founded by Samuel Morse, who is a polymath. He was a painter, inventor, and he founded the National Academy of Design alongside Hudson River School painters like Asher Durand, Thomas Cole. And it was an offshoot of James Fenimore Cooper's Bread and Cheese Club. So it was established in 1826. And it was part of this network of people. There's amazing network where people like James Fenimore Cooper, Lafayette, Samuel Morse, Alexander von Humboldt, they're all talking about philosophy and about what America can be and how they can have these kind of counter-hegemonic networks that are getting around the and combating the meddling of the British. So it was inspired by people like Friedrich Schiller and Alexander von Humboldt. So like I said, so Church, he's kind of a second wave of the National Academy of Design. He's younger than Cole and all these other guys. His life does intersect with many of them. Unlike the other National Academy of Design painters, he would take his paintings, which, some of the biggest ones were Niagara, the heart of the Andes, the icebergs. Instead of just showing them in the annual exhibition, he kind of had a road show. So he would go from major city to major city around the world, and he would charge a quarter. And it would attract crowds of tens of thousands of people for each one. They called them great pictures. And they were just, I'll show a picture soon, but they were very dramatically staged. And these were massive paintings. Some of them were 11 by 14. So people would walk in and they would just be blown away by the totality of what he had created. So unlike other Hudson River School painters, he never studied in Europe. I mean, he only visited Europe later in his life. He was much more inspired by Alexander von Humboldt, and he retraced Humboldt's steps through Ecuador and Colombia to study the natural world. And just a little bit about Humboldt. So he was known as a romantic polymath, and he explored South America from 1799 to 1804 with the goal of discovering how all the forces of nature are interlaced and interwoven. As I alluded to before, he sought faster and more reliable networks of communication across Paris without Napoleonic interference. So that's why he was traveling back and forth to America quite a bit. He interfaced with Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, Samuel Morse. Morse, you might recognize that name, Morse code. So Morse, in addition to being a painter, he was just a really smart guy. So he was hearing about electricity and how electricity can be sent across cables in pulses and different patterns. And he thought, like, oh, wow, that could be a way to send information across a long distance. So this presentation right now, this is facilitated in part thanks to Morse. He associated nature with an inherent right to individual freedom for all humankind. So it's not like he was woke in in the way we think of it now, but he was a very progressive for the time, as opposed to some of the people that came after him that I'll talk about, like Darwin. He supported, even though he was a European, he was very interested in American politics and trying to see through that we'd elect presidents that would stand up for the principles that the country was founded on. So he supported John Fremont against James Buchanan. And Fremont's campaign, he ran on an abolitionist platform that was inspired by Humboldt, and he was kind of the first wave before Lincoln came in and actually won. Humboldt's 1848 book was called Cosmos, Sketch of a Physical Description of the Universe. And this book, this was really his magnum opus. He was a pretty old man at that point when he put it out. This was the culmination of his life's work. And just so you keep the timeline straight, so 1848, that's about 10 years before Darwin's major work came out about his theory of evolution. And Humboldt was very, very different. So he thought that nature is not about a struggle for survival with a limited amount of resources, and everyone's just, you know, it's just chaotic and random. He believed that nature, I'll just quote him, nature considered rationally, that is to say, submitted to the process of thought, is a unity in diversity of phenomena, a harmony, blending together all created things, however dissimilar in form and attributes. One great whole animated by the breath of life. The most important result of rational inquiry into nature is, therefore, to establish the unity and harmony of this stupendous mass of force and matter. He also wrote that harmony was predicated on the suppression of all unnecessary detail. Only then could reason grasp all that might otherwise escape the limited range of the senses. So when you look at Hudson River School paintings and then compare them to other kinds of paintings, you'll see that there is a suppression of unnecessary detail, and it's not just a photorealistic recreation of what's actually there. For example, Heart of the Andes or the Niagara painting that Church did. It's actually impossible to to get into that position to see that exact scenery, because the fact is it was kind of him evoking what was there, and then making a painting that presents a metaphor, something that's sublime, that's not just a photograph. And I think Fox alluded to this last week about, when you take a photo with your phone, let's say you're seeing an amazing sunset, you take a photo and you just can't convey what it's like to be there in that moment because it's just not there. So making an amazing landscape portrait or landscape painting, you can actually do something that's better, that's greater than a photo, and can be more powerful and can convey so much more than even a photo can. So Church is inspired very much by Humboldt. So, if you're thinking about his lineage, it's like the two most important figures in Church's career were Cole and Humboldt. So he kind of, fuses them together. So if you go to Olana, you'll see that Church owned all of Humboldt's books. Um, you can see there, that's his painting of Niagara. Like I said, you can't, if you were in that position at Niagara Falls, you would die. So it's not like he went there and sat there for a long time painting. He went there and he got a feel for what it was like there. And then he made a painting that conveyed the magnificence of Niagara Falls and conveyed what Niagara Falls means to America, especially at that time before the Civil War. So this is a quote from Adam Badu, who was a military secretary to Grant. He wrote a really nice quote about Niagara, about the painting Niagara. He said, "It is grand and sublime. It is natural to the nation, since nature herself has given us the archetype. It is wild and ungovernable, mad at times, but all power is terrible at times. It is the effect of various causes. It is a true development of the American mind, the result of democracy, of individuality, of the expression of each, of the liberty allowed to all, of ineradicable and lofty qualities in human nature. It is inspired not only by the irresistible cataract, but by the mighty forest, by the 1,000 miles of river, by the broad continent we call our own, by the onward march of civilization, by the conquering of savage areas, characteristic alike of the Western backwoodsman, of the Arctic explorer, Southern filibuster, and the Northern merchant. So, of course, it gets expression in our art." And what he's kind of alluding to there is this notion that was important about the Hudson River School is about the civilizing nature of art, where, and this is another thing about Manifest Destiny, so that art could actually be used to civilize rather than force or, just might doing it. So Heart of the Andes, that's another one of Church's huge paintings that just rocked rocked the world. This was the apex of Church's career. This came out in 1859, which is a very important time in the world. So he put out Heart of the Andes. It was directly inspired by Humboldt's Cosmos. And a quote from Humboldt that often accompanied this painting was Humboldt, he wasn't a huge accomplished painter like Church, but he wrote about his hopes for landscape painting, which was in line with his overall philosophy and worldview. So he said, "Are we not justified in hoping that landscape painting will flourish with a new and hitherto unknown brilliancy, when artists of merit shall more frequently pass the narrow limits of the Mediterranean, and when they shall be enabled, far in the interior of continents, in the humid mountain valleys of the tropical world, to seize, with the genuine freshness of a pure and youthful spirit, on the true image of the varied forces of nature." So the Heart of the Andes was first exhibited in April of 1859. Um, like I said, the way Church approached things, he wanted lots of people to see his painting. So 12,000 people paid a quarter each to view the painting, and they waited for hours to see it. And you can see the full painting here without any interference. And you can see, some people say that the fact that the painting represents so many different regions of the world, like you see these snow-capped mountains, you see regular mountains, you kind of see a jungle environment, you see, more like North American forest, you see a little town, you see a waterfall, it has all these elements in it where um, it kind of represents this, American, the melting pot of the American continent where everything's kind of coming together. And you can see how it's staged here. So this is how they presented it to people. And this is the staging the dramatic staging that would cause people to faint when they saw it. It was, amazing. And you can see they have Washington, Adams, and Jefferson portraits above the painting, and then this framing of it. So the painting's frame had a breadth of 14 feet and a height of 13. The base of the edifice stood on the ground, ensuring that the landscape's horizon would be displayed at the viewer's eye level. They had drawn curtains on either side of it, creating the sense of a view out of a window. They had a skylight directed at the canvas, which heightened the perception that the painting was illuminated from within, as did the dark fabrics draped on the studio walls to absorb light. Opera glasses were draped onto the studio walls to absorb light. I'm sorry, were provided to patrons to allow examination of the landscape's details, and may have been necessary to satisfactorily view the painting at all, given the crowding in the exhibition room. And people wrote that women felt faint, men and women succumbed to the dizzying combination of terror and vertigo that they recognized as the sublime. Many of them will later describe a sensation of becoming immersed in or absorbed by this painting, whose dimensions, presentation, and subject matter speak of the divine power of nature. I'll quote Pierre Baudry here. He said it better than I can, kind of tying things together. Um, so he talks about, going back to John Quincy Adams' Monroe Doctrine, um, where Humboldt had said in inspiring this painting, while we maintain the unity of the human species, we at the same time repel the depressing assumption of superior and inferior races of men. There are nations more susceptible of cultivation, more highly civilized, more ennobled by mental cultivation than others, but none in themselves nobler than others. All are in like degree designed for freedom, a freedom of the in which the ruder conditions of society belongs only to the individual, but which, in social states enjoying political institutions, appertains as a right to the whole body of the community. So therefore, it was with this paradoxical intention that Church's Heart of the Andes was to put the entire range of our planet into a single painting. And we'll see in a minute how other people came after Humboldt and took things in a completely different direction to the detriment of our country. So I'll skip that for now. So in 1860, Friedrich Church, and this is a year after he puts out Heart of the Andes, he begins buying land in the Hudson Valley, and he collaborates with Friedrich Olmsted to do landscape architecture. So Friedrich Olmsted, he helps Church develop Olana, and you may know Olmsted. He was a collaborator with Edgar Allan Poe and Calvert Vaux, and they worked on Central Park. Olmsted and Vaux and Church all worked together on Central Park in New York City. And it's kind of this different school that is almost hard to comprehend in today's world about how landscape architecture and creating landscapes, creating environments in the world that people can enjoy, that are restorative and allow people to kind of experience nature, but also not in a way that is anti-development or Luddite or Ted K, like anti-technology. It's just kind of this different dynamic that has been killed mostly by people that we're going to talk about soon. So Church actually says at the time, he says he can make more and better landscapes this way at Olana than by tampering with canvas and paint. And he follows in the footsteps of Samuel Morse, who did something similar in Poughkeepsie with Locust Grove. I haven't been, I live near there. I haven't been there yet. I got to check it out. Samuel Morse is awesome. So some years later, this is later in Church's life, Niagara Falls becomes a major subject of concern for Americans. So Church had done that amazing painting of Niagara Falls, and then in the 1860s and 70s, the sublime experience of visiting Niagara Falls was starting to go away. So because the falls are so powerful, utilitarians had overly dammed the falls. There was tons of factories all around it. Everyone was like siphoning off the falls and using the power to power industries and factories and stuff. And there wasn't any consideration for the beauty of the falls. So this is actually a quote from Olmsted. So Church and Olmsted were hanging out in Church's studio, and he showed him a sketch of Niagara. And they started talking about how Niagara Falls was getting ruined. So they decided that they'd team up and they'd work together to make Niagara Falls beautiful again, while not destroying the industries that were there, without immiserating the American and Canadian public. So, you can see a picture here. It's not a full picture, but you can see that there's a lot of industry. There are bridges, there's factories there. But there's also, a lot of greenery and access for people to get up close to the falls and experience them. And today, in New York State, where I live, Niagara Falls is the biggest source of electricity that we have. A few years after Church and Olmsted, developed the landscape there and developed the parks. Tesla came in with Westinghouse, and they made a hydroelectric plant, and then many successive plants after that, and they've managed to balance development and utility with beauty and the sublime. So that's all well and good. So Church, he had a nice career, and he made pretty paintings, and he made a nice tourist site called Olana. So what's the big deal? Why did people care to undermine the Hudson River School? Why was that important, and what forces were out there to do it? And I was thinking about this, what is the big deal about this? And I think people today, a lot of people watching, we've probably heard a lot about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, right? This movement by the CIA to fund to subvert, the growing Marxist school of thought in America, and make all these ridiculous social movements and philosophers who helped really further undermine the United States, push us further in this crazy direction that we find ourselves in today. You can see that if you we just Fox and I, we just went to a Hudson River School exhibition at Munson Museum in Utica. Great exhibition. I would highly recommend checking it out. And right across the hallway from these amazing Hudson River School paintings, they have all the favorite Congress for Cultural Freedom artists. They have Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, and I can't. There's another one that's really bad. I can't remember the name. And it's just so stark. When you look at the Hudson River School, and your soul is just lit up, and you're so inspired, and you feel like you're just scratching the surface of the potential that you have and what our country has. And then you go across the hallway and you look at Jackson Pollock, and you just see like paint, splotched up on the wall, and you're just like, oh, I feel awful. I have to get out of here. So some of these things that are listed here, I'll go through how they undermined the Hudson River School. So one of the other most prominent descendant of Humboldt was Darwin. And Darwin took Humboldt's teachings and inspiration in a very different direction. So Darwin also traveled to South America separately from Friedrich Church. So if we could say that Church was his dual influences were Darwin, I'm sorry, where Church's influences were Humboldt and Cole, Darwin's influences were Humboldt and Thomas Malthus. And so when you put those two together, that's not a good combination. Anything with Malthus, your ears should prick up. So he was inspired by Thomas Malthus, who wrote an essay on the principal population. And Darwin, he went to South America. He saw all the teeming life and the biosphere there, and he applied Malthus's doctrine to the entire animal and plant kingdom, leading to the concept of the struggle for existence. And he wrote that this struggle is totally inevitable due to the high rate of reproduction among all organic beings. And he believed that in this struggle, any slight variation beneficial to an individual organism would increase its chances of survival. And this process, according to Darwin, is the foundation of natural selection and the origin of species. And then Darwin goes further. He emphasizes that these principles apply not only to animals, but to humans. So he put humans on the level of animals. He argued that instead of living in harmony, all of God's creatures are engaged in a continuous struggle for survival. And how does that differ from Humboldt? We were just talking about how Humboldt sees everything as living harmoniously and with an intelligent design that is deliberate, and that evolution, as it happens, is about evolving to a higher level, and not just in this random, my ear grew bigger, so now I can hear better and I can kill more things and reproduce more. So I'm gonna, everyone's gonna have big ears. That's Darwinism. So three aspects of Darwinism, and this is from an essay by Stephen J. Gould, who wrote an essay about Darwin, Humboldt, and Church. So three aspects of Darwinism. One was that nature is a scene of competition and struggle, not higher harmony. Order and good design arise by natural selection, only as a side consequence of struggle. And the Hobbesian war of all against all is the causal reality of most daily interactions in nature. The struggle is metaphorical and need not involve bloody battle, but more often than not, competition is overt, and some may die, the others may live. The struggle, moreover, is for the reproductive success of individual organisms, not directly in the service of any higher harmony. Darwin, in one of his most trenchant metaphors, seems to tear right through the faith of Humboldt and the canvases of Church in depicting harmony as dangerously misleading. Another aspect of Darwinism, evolutionary lineages have no intrinsic direction toward higher states or greater unification. Natural selection is only a process of local adaptation as organisms change in response to alterations in their environment. The geological and climatological causes of environmental change have no inherent direction either. Evolution is opportunistic. Here's the other one. Hudson River School painting of Darwin that AI made. Evolutionary changes are not propelled by an internal and harmonious force. Evolution balance between the internal characteristics of organisms and the external vector of environmental change. Both the internal and external forces have strong random components, further obviating any notion of impulse towards union and harmony. The internal force of genetic mutation, the ultimate source of evolutionary variation, is random with respect to the direction of natural selection. The external force of environmental change is capricious with respect to the progress and complexity of organisms. So let's contrast that with Humboldt. So Humboldt, on the topic of harmony and struggle, he said that harmony and interconnectedness of nature was the way he saw things. So he viewed ecosystems as balanced and unified wholes. He believed in a harmonious natural world where different elements work together in a cohesive manner. And then contrast that to Darwin. He said that nature is about competition and struggle, and everything's a byproduct of natural selection. The emphasis is on survival rather than harmony. When it comes to direction and purpose, Humboldt believed in a purposeful and interconnected natural world where all elements contributed to a greater unity and purpose, with environmental and internal factors working together in a balanced way to shape life. Darwin, on the other hand, said that evolution doesn't have any direction or purpose, and it's driven by local adaptations and random forces. There's no inherent move towards higher states of unification, which contrasts with purposeful evolving harmony. So 1859, so Darwin's big book comes out about the origin of species, and it's like a bomb drops on the world. You know, the book is heavily promoted, especially, by the British. It justifies British imperialism. It justifies treating humans like animals, treating certain people from certain places as better than other people. And it contrasts very sharply with the Hudson River School and the affiliated schools of thought that came from patriots like, Cooper and Morse and Poe. So the Hudson River School's core ideas, which were Humboldtian in nature, lost relevance due to the rise of Darwinian science. Right after 1859, we also have the Civil War. So America no longer saw itself as the new Eden. So the Hudson River School's ideals, which were so popular and viral and exciting to people, they stopped being so exciting. And, a chauvinistic new kind of art about the bad manifest destiny, that starts to take hold. European art idealizes self-expression over realism and weakened the intellectual foundation of the landscape school. The focus on representing God's works over the artist's emotions had lost significance. A couple other things too. This is just trivial, but at Olana, if you go check it out, they make a very big deal to say that, oh, well, church has some of Darwin's books because they're desperate to tie in church with Darwin. They're desperate to say, oh, well, church actually, he believed science and he's not a science denier, but he had Darwin's early stuff. But once Darwin put out On the Origin of Species, he doesn't have any of Darwin's later works. He also didn't own anything by Ernest Haeckel or Huxley. So, Church was not an ecology guy. He stuck to his Humboldtian roots, and for that, he should be applauded. So another thing that is often lumped in with the Hudson River School is a school of philosophy called Transcendentalism. And Transcendentalism, it had some crossover with the Hudson River School, like Ralph Waldo Emerson was a friend of Thomas Cole. And actually, when Cole died, Emerson gave a very moving eulogy at his funeral. So, Emerson was trying to influence the Hudson River School. So Transcendentalism was mostly a New England thing. Hudson River School, it's cooler. It's a New York thing. So the New England people, their core beliefs was that, and it's kind of this precursor to this Gnostic mysticism of oneness. So they believed in the essential unity of all creation, the innate goodness of humanity, and the supremacy of insight over logic and experience. So it's all about, your feelings, and it's compatible with Darwinism because if you see yourself as an animal, then you can think, oh yeah, I'm just vibing, and I don't have any right to do anything. I'm just another animal, just with everyone else. I'm like a dog or a monkey or a bird. So Henry David Thoreau, he was a prominent transcendentalist. One of his quotes was, "I will speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil." Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was another prominent transcendentalist. He believed in regressing to a natural primitive state. And a great example of that there's a farm that he started outside of Boston called Fruitland. And they actually, they were trying to be a working farm, but the transcendentalism got in the way. So they couldn't make candles, which was, I guess, a way that they could do things at the time. They couldn't use animal power, and they didn't want to make honey because it was exploitative to the bees. So that's transcendentalism. They want you to live in a shack like Ted K, basically. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, like I said, friend of Thomas Cole, but he also had a lot of friends in England. Um, so he traveled to England quite a bit. He would hang out with John Stuart Mill, who was the head of intelligence for the British East India Company. He supported Emerson. John Stuart Mill was basically in England supporting Emerson and claiming to England to the British that Emerson represents American thought. So, Mill was very important to promoting Emerson and kind of boosting him or astroturfing him to make it seem like he was a big deal. Uh, Emerson also hung out with Thomas Carlyle a lot. Carlyle was in Britain advocating for reinstating slavery and serfdom. Carlyle was anti-industry because he thought it would end feudalism correctly. He also worked to promote Emerson in Europe. Emerson referred to Carlyle as my general. And then we have Henry David Thoreau, who was an offshoot of Emerson, and he admired Darwin's view of nature as a constant new creation. He advocated for steady progress according to existing laws. So basically, the Transcendentalists, once Darwin came out, they got in line with Darwin, and the Hudson River School did not. There was another guy also, he'll come up again later, but there's another guy that was influential on the Transcendentalists. I just learned about him today, but apparently he was a big deal. Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was a Swedish theologian, scientist, philosopher, and mystic, and cult leader. He started a cult. So he's best known for his writings on spirituality, theology, and the nature of the afterlife. He claimed to have visions and spiritual experiences, which he would write about. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, he loved Swedenborg. He was a Swedenborgian. He mentioned him quite a bit. And Swedenborgian, to sum it up, it's a cult of saying, "I know what I know." It's and you can see that a lot in modern politics. So it's this populist appeal to saying, you already know all the answers. You don't have to learn anything. You don't have to show your work. You don't have to figure anything out. Just if it doesn't feel right, just it's not right. If you don't understand it, you don't have to do it. So these are a couple of quotes from Emerson. Let's see. I'll just read it a little bit. Emerson paraphrased Swedenborg when he said, "We know truth when we see it. Let skeptic and scoffer say what they choose. Foolish people ask you when you have spoken what they do not wish to hear. How do you know it's the truth and not an error of your own? Well, we know truth when we see it from opinion, as we know when we are awake that we are awake." It was a grand sentence of Emanuel Swedenborg, which would alone indicate the greatness of that man's perception. It is no proof of a man's understanding to be able to confirm whatever he pleases, but to be able to discern that what is true, and that what is false is false. This is the mark and character of intelligence. So yeah, so you can see that, as people that are independent thinking and trying to seek our own truths and come up with our own creative discoveries, you can see how this kind of thinking is extremely dangerous. Because on one hand, we have this impulse, we want to find the truth, we want to find the real truth, we want to think things out independently. But this is kind of like a false solution to that. It's saying what they're implying is that there are no universal truths on which to base anything. This is implying that truth is subjective. If you don't, there's no way to prove an actual truth. It's all just your opinion. So we'll see. That's going to come into play later a little bit too. So another thing that undermined the Hudson River School is the Barbizon Luminism school of painting. So I'm going to let my voice rest a little bit for a second here, and I'm going to encourage some participation. So this is a George Inness painting, who is often lumped in with the Hudson River School. And we've looked at a number of Hudson River School paintings so far on the screen. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves and tell me, what do you see? What do you see in this painting that's similar, different, that you like, that you don't like? What's different about this painting from some of the Friedrich Church paintings that we saw already?
And everyone is by default on mute, so you have to take yourself off mute if you want to throw in your 2 cents.
There's no life in the painting.
Well, there's cows. They're alive.
Everything's blurry.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Monet. It's no details, and the trees in the back there, in the horizon, it's just there's no detail to it at all. And then I was wondering about this black figure in the middle here. What is he doing? He looking for a 4-leaf clover?
It's flat. It's almost two-dimensional.
Yeah, I think if compare this to Heart of the Andes, I don't think that people were lining up around the block to see this and getting wowed by it. It's just it's kind of emo, it's kind of blah, it's it makes me feel depressed. So let's look into why that is. And why the hell is this lumped in with the Hudson River School? That's weird. So I'm going to quote Baudry again. And what you can see here, this is a Jervis McEntee painting, who was a student of Church's, but McEntee was also heavily influenced by Luminism and the Barbizon school, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So here we go. So Baudry writes, the Barbizon style of painting was introduced in the Hudson River School by George Inness, Jervis McEntee, and was used to infect Whitridge, Gifford, and others. Whitridge and Gifford, they're kind of like the third wave of Hudson River School guys who are holding on at the end to the original ideals. Barbizon is the name of the village in Fontainebleau, France, where the founders of the French school, Theodore Rousseau and Jean-Francois Millet were from, or Millet, I don't know. Their trademark and that of their followers was to use art for the purpose of expressing anti-industrial dreaminess and melancholy. In short, it was a British-French existentialist countercultural operation that was introduced to the United States with the purpose of stamping out the James Fenimore Cooper Cultural Revolution. Barbizon was also called pre-impressionism in France and the luminist school in the United States. The luminist style was invented by some nasty New York art critics and historians in order to create tendencies among the Hudson River School painters and pin them against each other as a divide and conquer type of tactical psychological warfare against the older and more mature members of the school. So this is the full Jervis McEntee painting, and just like the George Inness one we just looked at, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's kind of it's blurry, and it's kind of like you know, it's melancholy, and you know, it's not you know, it's pretty. It's definitely there's some skill here for sure. And Jervis McEntee, he's actually from Kingston, which is where I am, and he's buried here. He's Kingston's Hudson River School painting, but unfortunately, he kind of fell into this luminism thing that undermined the Hudson River School. Piece of trivia about him too is that he was a good friend of Calvin Booth, or not Calvin Booth, but whoever John Wilkes Booth's brother was, Edwin Booth. He was a personal friend of Edwin Booth, which is kind of weird, but haven't really found anything else to that, but strange. So the Barbizon school, or luminism, it aimed to shift the use of ironies and paradoxes to an emphasis on luminism and impressionistic effects. So luminism is a technique in painting designed to conceal brush strokes and soften the outlines of objects, which is often compared to Leonardo da Vinci's sfumato. It can be an effective finishing technique, but excessive reliance on luminism can turn into a form of artistic deception, which diminishes the form of objects to mere impressions of light. The overuse of luminism ultimately leads to a style of art that became a prevailing mode of composition in the United States. And we can see how that happened. You know, so we have more information on George Inness, who was deeply influenced by Swedenborg, who we already mentioned about being tied in with the Transcendentalists. And this is an account from art historian Charlie Parker. And he outlines George Inness's evolution from a Hudson River School student to a critic of its principles after his first trip to France in 1854. George Inness was always trying to get into the Hudson River School, but he couldn't. Or he couldn't get into the National Academy of Art, but he still got lumped in with all the artists. So he started out painting like the Hudson River School people, but then he started getting influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg, who, like I said, the Swedish cult leader. Swedenborg's ideas about the connection between the natural and spiritual realms profoundly resonated with Inness. He embraced Swedenborg's concept of as above, so below. Inness aimed to express divine essence through his depictions of the natural world. So here's more Pierre Baudry on Inness. He found this great quote from George Inness Jr., who is the son of Inness. He talked about how the Barbizon school opened up his father to new fields of vision and avenues of thought. They took him out of the narrow confines of the Hudson River School and placed him in the rare atmosphere of the masters of the world. And here's how George Inness Jr. describes his son painting. So he says there, A, slam in a thundercloud in the right-hand corner, and then B, rush a battery of light down in that middle distance. And C, keep hammering away at the foreground. Never mind if you're out of tone, we'll get a harmony when we put a glaze over the whole thing. And then with a little tickling up here and there with pigment, we'll finish the greatest landscape that was ever painted. And this is not at all imaginary, for that was one of my father's pet theories. He thought he could direct any man or group of men to paint in this way and produce as great a picture as he could paint himself. At times, he seemed to be obsessed with the idea that painting a picture was purely mechanical, needing only the master brain to direct. So, once again, we can see what that kind of painting results in. And, we have actually, I found a video of one of George Inness's lectures on painting. So this is pretty interesting. Guys should check this out.
Right up in here, let's put it almighty mountain. There. Just let this mountain flow right off your knife. And we're really pushing this painting to the canvas. We want to push it right into the fabric if possible. Maybe another little box right there. Okay. Now with a large brush, we can very gently pull this down a little bit. This removes excess paint and allows your mountain to get lighter on the bottom. Just put it down. All we're worried about is a nice outside edge. We could care less what's happening inside right now. So let's take a little bit of Van Dyke Brown and burn under mixed together. Just mix it right here on the palette.
Yeah. So, so that's an example. That was obviously Bob Ross, and I don't. If anyone wants to learn painting and techniques and stuff like that, go right ahead. But in terms of the mastery of American schools of painting, you can see where that kind of stuff leads to with George Inness and that school of painting infecting the Hudson River School. And the tipping point of this, as Baudry identifies, is the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. And this is where there was a war that broke out between the Barbizon American painters like Inness and the people of the Cooper-Morse orientation. And the Cooper-Morse orientation, they lost. So they retreated, they went into the shadows, and kind of the free trade art dealers who took over the art world. We think about art and we wonder, like, well, why is some art so valuable? Why do people spend so much money in art? And there's a speculative nature to it. That is the result of kind of this free trade movement that infected the art world and infected art. Artists, when it comes to the divide between painting for the soul versus painting for bread, they might be thinking about, okay, well, what's the market going to be for this painting? So Barbizon, Baudry says that Barbizon was the cultural smallpox of the Philadelphia Centennial. The leading painter, who was still of the Cooper-Morse orientation, he said that this was the gravest crisis for the Hudson River School, the worst turning point of his life. 1876, that's kind of seen, at this exposition, which kind of represented the best of America and, spoke for what is American. The Hudson River School was not represented. It was the Barbizon, Bob Ross paintings that were represented. And this was a very significant event. So another one of the interesting veins, I originally thought this was just going to be about Church and Darwin and how that's, sad for Humboldt. But this is yet another force. And, you can see why at the Hudson River School, there was like 3 or 4 different operations going on at the same time to undermine it, because it was so important for teaching Americans how to think. I think that's, we're going to go into this in a little bit, but I'll just set this up by saying, we have so many false binaries in our politics. If you know about housing, if you live in a city in North America, you probably heard of YIMBY versus NIMBY, or, in national politics, we have left versus right, or we have, Gaia worshiper versus, drill baby drill, all these false dichotomies. And, elevating the American mind, or elevating the human mind, and elevating our souls and being able to think creatively and on a mass scale, and having people be geniuses, have creative discoveries. That is the key to busting through these kind of false dichotomies. And in this next anecdote that's very related to the Hudson River School, Manifest Destiny, we're going to kind of see how those false dichotomies get started. So here we have a painting. This is called Hunter Mountain. Hunter Mountain Twilight. And this is by, what's his name? Can't remember. Sanford Gifford. That's I'm sorry. I've been working on this presentation too long. This is by Sanford Gifford. This is a painting in the 1850s called Hunter Mountain. And this is of Hunter Mountain. It's near where I live. And you can kind of see here, I'll move this along. I'll just say, like, look at all these trees cut down. It's not like a Thomas Cole painting where there's just one tree cut down in the foreground. You can see kind of the devastation here, where there's a lot of logging that was done. It wasn't done tastefully. It wasn't done with a with a reverence for what they're destroying or any kind of thought. It was just kind of like, oh, we're just going to come through and chop all these trees down, not do anything to make it look good. And this is a nice area. So what is the point of this painting? So that painting, this is Hunter today. All the forest is back. It's kind of been, they kind of went in the opposite direction at Hunter Mountain. So now it's it's one of those protected areas where you can't do anything. But so Baudry writes that Hunter Mountain was the first ecological scandal of deforestation in America to be put on record. And the man responsible for this state of affair was actually a patron of the Hudson River School. It was this guy named James Pinchot. So he was a lumber millionaire, and he became friends with Whitridge and Gifford, who were very prominent Hudson River School painters towards the end. So let's just sit with that for a second. So Pinchot, James Pinchot was the guy that caused this to happen. He starts cozying up with the Hudson River School. He buys this painting, and let's see what happens with that. So James Pinchot, he bought Hunter Mountain Twilight, that painting, and put it up on his mantelpiece over his family home fireplace in order to hide it from the general public. He used it as a Damocles sword over the head of his own son, warning him against the dangers of public opinion. So he names his son after the artist. So, his son's name is Gifford Pinchot. That's named after Sanford Gifford. So Pinchot baptized his son Gifford. He made Sanford Gifford the godfather. The picture was first exhibited at the National Academy of Design. It was later shown in Paris. It was a smashing success, became the talk of all art lovers. So this is another picture of the Pinchot family, very rich people, and they go on to be very influential. So, and what Baudry asserts here is kind of that the Pinchot family, they become the fox inside of the Hudson River chicken coop. So James Pinchot, apparently, what is claimed in history is that he felt very guilty and very bad and sad about what he did to Hunter Mountain. He bought that painting to kind of, self-flagellate himself over it and torture himself over it. But what ends up happening is a little different, and it creates one of these false dichotomies that we talk about in politics and in history. And first, to set that up, I'm just going to kind of pick from this passage from Pierre Baudry. So he says that Gifford Pinchot was born in 1865. He becomes one of the most notorious environmentalist friends of Teddy Roosevelt, and later became the governor of Pennsylvania for 2 terms. It's quite an irony that he works with John Muir, who is the granddaddy of environmentalism. He becomes the first director of the United States Forest Service under the Roosevelt presidency. And so the the most prominent conservationist in America. So Pinchot, we'll talk about this in a second, but Pinchot was a conservationist, not a preservationist. And this is one of those false dichotomies that was very, very contentious in the United States about 100 years ago. So conservationists were about smart use and conserving natural resources, using them in a controlled way because they were limited. There was a limit to the amount of resources. And preservationists, on the other hand, like John Muir, they were more directly descended from the Transcendentalist school. So they thought that nature is just perfect the way it is. We shouldn't touch it. So when you see a forest that is preserved, that means that there's no logging going on. There's nothing being extracted from it. Whereas a conservationist, there's more of a utilitarian bent to it. And for Pinchot and the Pinchot family, what Gifford Pinchot becomes is kind of this guy that where his family is a logging family, and he's put in the driver's seat of conservation, which is basically about creating a monopoly on logging. So conservation just means, okay, well, we can log, but we have to do it a certain way that is, scientific and measured and just enough. And you just have to keep respecting our authority to do this. No one else can. We can do it. And that's kind of like, what the Teddy Roosevelt conservation was like. So what happens is that, there's this Hunter Mountain thing, this painting. James Pinchot, like I said, he's very, very upset about his own perception of public opinion. This Hunter Mountain painting makes him look really bad. And so he starts buying up Hudson River School paintings. And it's unexplainable. It's unexplainable that this guy that he's like, oh, this painting, I feel so guilty about this. It's beautiful. I care about the environment, all this other stuff, but I'm going to buy up all these Hudson River School paintings. And at this time, the Hudson River School paintings are getting pretty cheap because the original school, the Cooper, the Cooper Morse Cole era is out of favor, and luminism is in style. So he buys up 200 works of Hudson River School paintings and just puts them in his basement. And it's only 90 years later, when Gifford Pinchot dies, that they find some of them. And, these paintings, they're worth like six figures now. And so some of the paintings are recovered, but the house just gets demolished and the paintings get destroyed with them. So there are works of art that have been lost to history where, when we think about the purpose of the Hudson River School and how, Fox said last week that it was a warning to the American people, and that if people looked at the paintings and studied them, they could learn how to think on a higher level and be inspired to new levels of, creative discovery. But instead, what happens is that the paintings get put in this guy's basement and destroyed, or at the very least, they get held from public view for 90 years. And all we're left with are luminism and transcendentalism and, all this crap. So next. So we'll talk a little more about Gifford Pinchot because we're going to go deeper into this false dichotomy. So he was an American forester and politician. He served as the first chief of the United States Forest Service, which is what Teddy Roosevelt created with him. He was a key figure in the early conservation movement. He advocated for the sustainable use of natural resources, and he believed in managing forests for their economic value, arguing that they should be used for the greatest good for the greatest number of people over the long term. And you can hear Jeremy Bentham in that, and he was directly influenced by Jeremy Bentham as a utilitarian. And so that's where conservation comes from. It's a very utilitarian mindset, which is different from preservation. It's easier to reason with a utilitarian, but still there's not that higher purpose where it's just about materialism and utility and having the greatest, quantifying everything. And it's not about this higher purpose where, okay, like we'll get into this in a minute, but you think about Alana, Central Park, these things that are not just utility, but about being, beauty and how humans can create beauty, and we can do that because we have minds and we can think, we can create things. So Pinchot clashes with John Muir, who was the founder of the Sierra Club, and he was the Sierra Club. That's like the granddaddy, grand wizard of all the environmental organizations in the United States that have blocked everything. Everything pro development, pro industry has been blocked by Sierra Club, and they want to keep natural landscapes in their untouched state. And they come to loggerheads about something called the Hetch Hetchy Dam in Yosemite in California. And that's, if you look back 100 years ago, that was the battleground for conservation versus preservation. And we'll talk about that in a second because Hudson River School actually got there first. But I just want to touch on Anton Chaikin wrote about Gifford Pinchot a little bit. He wrote a great essay called How Populists Are Turned into Traitors. And, if you follow politics right now, I mean, there's a lot of attempts at populism. Anton Chaikin wrote a nice little piece about this a long time ago, like 30 years ago. And he writes about how Gifford Pinchot is he believed in something called wise use, which is this utilitarian environmentalism. And it stems from the deceptive initiatives of Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, and it brings programs designed by the British Empire in India into the United States, disguised as a conservative alternative to environmentalist paganism. And actually, Gifford Pinchot coined the term conservation. That wasn't really a term in the West until Gifford Pinchot started using it. And it's derived from conservator, which was a position in the British East India Company. Conservators appointed by Britain were sent to India to manage their forests, in this colonialist way. And now it's like, oh, okay, well, we don't even need the British East India Company. We'll manage our forest. We'll colonize our own forests. Our own way. So Roosevelt and Pinchot claimed to sponsor the wise use or conservation of resources rather than their total lockup, which is what the Gaia-worshipping, transcendentalist, preservation people wanted. Roosevelt then uses conservation to shut down settlement, to freeze land, to overturn Lincoln's program of government-subsidized railroad building, and ends Lincoln's government grants for homes, farms, colleges, factories, and mines. So basically, it's this kind of conservation is this Trojan horse, where, it's a populist Trojan horse where you say these things that are agreeable about the environment, but then you just go and do whatever you want to do anyway. So Gifford Pinchot, just a little further about, about him and his Benthamite ideology and what it leads to. So Gifford Pinchot on resources. So Pinchot wrote that there are just two things on this material earth: people and natural resources. As a result, the central premise of conservation is that the latter be utilized in the long-term interest of the former. He appeals to a modification of Bentham's utilitarian maxim for a definition of conservation. He says conservation means the greatest good to the greatest number for the longest time. The conservation of natural resources is the key to the future. It is the key to the safety and prosperity of the American people and all the people of the world for all the time to come. The very existence of our nature and of all the rest depends on conserving the resources which are the foundation of its life. That is why conservation is the greatest material question of all. Moreover, conservation is a foundation of permanent peace among the nations. And, by the way, he was also a member of Arthur Balfour's Society for Psychic Research, and he was a enthusiastic participant in the Eugenics Congress. So when we think about that, and we think about, okay, so this guy is saying, on one hand, it's like, okay, it's good that he wants to use natural resources. That's better than the Gaia worshiper degrowthers, right? But on the other hand, he's like, oh, but in order to have peace on the world, we need to conserve. And like you think of Jimmy Carter, right? Saying like, oh, you're cold? Well, put on a sweater. We're not gonna give you oil. And it's the same idea. So it's this idea that we all need to degrow ourselves and shrivel up in a corner and get our allotment. And that's how we're going to be peaceful. Instead of saying, well, what about peace through development, which is, the ethos of the Belt and Road Initiative and some of the initiatives of the BRICS nations, where they want to, instead of saying, we need to have a controlled entropic, neutering of our own countries, of our own sovereignty, they're actually saying, well, we actually want to bust through these fake limits to growth. So you can see how the conservation, like I said, this false dichotomy between conservation and preservation, it all ends up in the same place, where it's lower standard of living, for reasons that basically come down to, you see man as an animal that can't reason and can't bust through these limits to growth. So yeah, just I mentioned this a little bit, this Hetch Hetchy Dam, and this was something where this played out, this preservation versus conservation thing. And to go back several slides, we go back to this painting was above Gifford Pinchot's mantle when he's growing up as a kid, and he gets, his father obviously taught him the wrong lesson from all this. And instead of going down in the basement and looking at all the paintings, Gifford Pinchot ends up, being this utilitarian conservationist, which is, very. I wish he had read some James Fenimore Cooper and studied some other Hudson River School stuff, because maybe he could have realized that you don't have to be utilitarian to develop things. You can actually be a Promethean, and you can believe that development can be beautiful and that we can make the environment more beautiful, and it's not just all negatives in service of a goal. So Hetch Hetchy Dam in Yosemite was this battleground where Muir, who was the Transcendentalist, and Pinchot, who was the Benthamite, luminist guy. So Muir opposes the damming of Hetch Hetchy, and this is the huge environmental debate of the early 20th century. John Muir says that natural landscapes should be preserved in their pristine state. Hetch Hetchy was a sister valley to the Yosemite Valley in California. It's right on the edge of Yosemite Valley, and it's got equal natural beauty and ecological value. Muir argues that the valley's destruction would be an irreparable loss to future generations in the natural world. Gifford Pinchot, on the other hand, he supported the damming, and he argued that the utilitarian use of natural resources would be for the greater good. And this dam, this was shortly after the fires in San Francisco in the early 20th century. So San Francisco was a growing city. They desperately needed water. Pinchot was saying this is the fastest solution that we can have. So, he believed in a conservation ethic. So, doing it in a very measured way, but purely for utilitarian reasons, and not saying, well, can this be beautiful? Can we make something that transcends this false dichotomy? So this is actually a painting that Bierstadt did of Yosemite, of Hetch Hetchy, the edge of Hetch Hetchy, which is overlapping with Yosemite. So Bierstadt did a painting like this. This is low res. I couldn't find a high res version, so it's not intentionally luminist, but there's a lot going on here. And we can talk a little bit about Bierstadt, who was kind of this later Hudson River School painter. And how he, till the end, he upheld the original manifest destiny, which held all the answers to the false preservation versus conservation debate. So Bierstadt, he was going through kind of the West. He was hired by the government and by different groups as they were surveying and traveling in the West and checking out what natural resources there were, checking out what potential there was for development, what possibilities were out there. They brought along an artist, and that was Bierstadt. And it's very different, from what you think about today, where you think about developers and greedy speculators and stuff, and they just go out and they come up with all these plans, and they're thinking about how many houses they can cram into a small area, and but they bring Bierstadt with them, and he's actually making these beautiful paintings of the Western frontier. So, for example, he did a piece called "The Rocky Mountains, Lander's Peak," and in his pamphlet, he concludes with the hope that upon the painting's foreground plane, that there will be a city populated by our descendants, which may rise, and in its art galleries, this picture may eventually find a resting place. Another one, the domes of Yosemite, which is this painting. A local newspaper had written, "We recommend our readers to go at once and see the work. They will feel that the world is progressing and that the Americans are a great people." So, when we look back to this debate between preservation and conservation, Bierstadt was long gone. I think this painting was from 40 years prior. But we look at this dam and it's like, oh, this isn't very appealing. Maybe it could look a lot nicer. Like we looked at Niagara Falls before. That looked like a pretty nice area, but maybe they didn't. They should have hired more artists and fewer utilitarians to work on this problem with Hetch Hetchy Dam. So just to close the loop on Gifford Pinchot and his family. So Gifford Pinchot, they for some reason they keep naming their descendants Gifford Pinchot. So the first Gifford Pinchot, he goes on to become the governor of Pennsylvania. Then he passes away in 1943. That's when they discover all those Hudson River School paintings in his house. His son goes on to found the Natural Resources Defense Committee, huge environmental organization. And then his son becomes a doctor, and he in the 70s, he's arguing against nuclear power in Pennsylvania, saying that the plants are not worth the risk of detrimental health effects due to radiation. And if we think about nuclear power and all the reasons why, over the years, like Matt and Rising Tide have advocated for nuclear power. I mean, one of them is that it can be a beautiful way to add to nature and make nature, not just preserve it, but improve nature. When we think about the alternatives, where solar panels, when we look back to this Hunter Mountain painting today, my area of the world, New York State, upstate New York, they're going to be clear cutting this. What environmentalists want to do is clear cut this forest and put in solar panels, which only work, 15% of the time, and make electricity more expensive and leach all these chemicals into the water. So when we think about nuclear energy, I mean, this is a huge mistake that the Pinchot family, they're prominently arguing against nuclear power in Pennsylvania in the 70s. So Pinchot goes, in his arguments to try to block nuclear power in Pennsylvania, he says that he makes a utilitarian argument. He says studies show that the plants create fewer jobs and costing too much to build and are not safe. Pinchot advocated alternative energy sources and conservation, and said conservation does not mean freezing in the dark. He said experts contend that the United States wastes half its energy it produces, and it would be better to cut off our energy use in half than build twice as many generating stations. And we think about the standard of living in the United States, deindustrialization in the United States. If anything, we need to be producing a lot more energy. Nuclear power is a great way to do that while busting through the natural, the supposed natural limits to growth. So, so to kind of wrap things up, we're going to talk about the civilizing power of art. And this is James Fenimore Cooper. So the Promethean idea of expanding Western, I think this is still Pierre Baudry. So, paraphrasing from him again. The Promethean idea of expanding Western civilization throughout the United States was stamped very subtly on a significant number of the Hudson River School paintings, and with such manifest ironies that it attracted the patriotic spectator into seeking and discovering those thoughtful moments that only a unique American landscape could make visible to an inquisitive mind. They were paintings of discovery, which meant bringing together a fitting correspondence between man and nature in a manner such that the classical development of one became also the civilizing improvement of the other. This art of civilizing the wilderness by means of paintings was explicitly inspired by the method of James Fenimore Cooper. That is to say, by his thoughtful way of producing ironies intentionally, but in all appearance unintended, as if nature had created a specific effect, but with the appearance of having been produced by chance. Could nature really have done that? Must be the question that the spectator asks of the painting. So we're going to circle back to kind of the original thesis of this presentation. So Olana, which is Friedrich Church's estate, which is it's kind of like he got older, he stopped painting, and then instead of making paintings, he made this beautiful landscape. He engineered it and designed it. So in the 1960s, the last of Church's descendants are kind of dying off, and they want to sell Olana. They held on to it for about 60 years after his death. And what happens is instead of they're trying to sell it to private bidder, and then this movement of academics pops up in the area, and they decide they're going to save Olana. But in order to gain attention to do that, they struggle to explain the significance of Friedrich Church. They don't go into this is, and keep in mind this is less than 100 years after the Centennial Exhibition. This is before the Hudson River School is brought back again. The Hudson River School is very dormant. People aren't talking about it then. So the academics say that they had a hard time coming up with a thesis that explained Church's significance until they decided to graft Transcendentalism onto Church and onto the Hudson River School. So I have I have kind of a long passage here. So what was written about this was that these Transcendentalist books enabled Huntington to relate Church to the Transcendentalists, especially Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and present an interpretation of the artist's paintings as an expression of what he termed a millennialist version of manifest destiny. Church's popularity during the 50s and 60s, he argued, resulted from the degree to which the public identified with this ideological vision. So at that time, these academics, they create a trust to save Olana, and they end up selling it to New York State's government with the provision that they will always be able to control the board of directors of Olana. So basically, Olana is this captured institution now, which is why it's so important, today that when you go on a tour there or you look at some of the literature that they have, they're always trying to tie Church into the Transcendentalists and even Darwin. They always make sure they point out that Church has Darwin's books, but he doesn't have the ones about evolution or anything that conflicts with Humboldt. Church was a Humboldtian all the way. So this is going back to Baudry about how the Hudson River School kind of gets revved up again in the 1980s. So it was 111 years after the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition that the Metropolitan Museum of Art puts out an exhibition called American Paradise, The World of the Hudson River School. And Baudry writes, even then, the Hudson River School was not revived for its own specific value and merit. It was revived in order to coincide with the environmentalist concern of the 1980s and to serve the opportunistic purpose of the anti-science and anti-technology ideology. The exhibition of American Paradise, The World of the Hudson River School, was nothing else but an environmentalist paradise. This is how the foolish art historian Louise Minx dubbed this new fallacy of composition. Minx writes, in an American society dominated by technology, the remaining landscape is again regarded as a repository of high and holy meaning and an oasis. As the protection of the natural world from destruction is now a national concern, the reverence for nature embodied in early American landscape art reminds us of ideals relevant today. So Baudry writes, what folly this is, once again, to divert the attention of art away into still yet another public opinion fad, rather than to reestablish the only true purpose for which art has ever been in existence, and that is for the ironic truth of developing creativity. Therefore, it should not surprise you to find that in the year 2008, 132 years after the destruction of the Hudson River School, the respect due to the creative process of these artists is still wanting and will continue to be wanting until the moment comes when the Anglo-Dutch liberal shareholder value system is finally replaced by the American principle holder value system. And I think that Baudry really nails it there, where the purpose of the Hudson River School, above all else, is about developing creativity in the minds of Americans as the only American school of art that's worth anything. The purpose of it was not to say, oh, don't touch the environment, or oh, development is actually good. It's about getting people to think and develop creativity and not have this this mindset that that philosopher that we talked about before. Let me just go back here for a second. Swedenborg, to not be Swedenborgian, where we're saying that, oh, well, if I feel it, it's right. It's about actually finding, where are those universal truths? And, what universal truths do we have, and how can we creatively think and elevate our minds to get past some of these false dichotomies that the British and other forces want us to get trapped in all the time. So a couple more slides, and then I'll wrap up because we're at an hour and a half now. So I don't know if this perspective is familiar, but this looks a lot like that church painting of Olana in the winter. And that's because this is actually a photoshopped photo from the perspective of Olana. In 1977, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Power Authority of New York held hearings on siting a nuclear power plant along the Hudson River directly in Olana's main view. Environmentalists claimed that the plant's smoke plume would have occasionally obscured views of the Catskill Mountains from Olana. There was much local opposition, and during legal hearings, Olana's views played a role. A winter scene painting by Frederic Church of the view in question served as evidence. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission ultimately recommended denial of a construction license for the proposed nuclear power plant. This was the first and only time that such a recommendation had been made on any grounds, let alone environmental or aesthetic. So just, so we look at this, and, this is obviously cooked up by the environmentalists to make it look like there was this giant smoke plume all the time. But this is just another example of, first of all, false dichotomies of, well, it's binary. Either we build the plant, for utilitarian reasons, or we say, okay, we have to preserve everything the way it is because it was made that way, and that gives me spiritual pleasure. And I want to run through the woods naked and, be an animal. It's a false dichotomy. If Friedrich Church was alive, if we look at the example of Niagara Falls, Friedrich Church was able to make Niagara Falls beautiful, but also Niagara Falls is New York State's largest power plant. It's the largest source of energy we have. And I can't help but wonder, like, what if Friedrich Church was alive? What if he was working with the nuclear industry to help design these nuclear reactors to make them more beautiful and to fit them into the natural environment that obviously is very beautiful. The timing of this is very interesting too. This is 1979, so this reactor is actually the same design as the 3 Mile Island reactor. If you want to look on spacecommune.substack.com, we've done a lot of research into kind of the inside job and construction of a hysteria around nuclear power in the 70s, culminating in the release of the movie The China Syndrome and kind of this staged disaster of where nobody died at 3 Mile Island. And this was all happening at the same time, where the Hudson River School is being co-opted to serve the interests of these anti-nuclear people that ultimately are working in the interests of the Council on Foreign Relations and all these bad things. Oh yeah, so I kind of ruined my own conclusion here. What would Church and Olmsted do? And you can see here, I mean, this is a photograph of industry and development coexisting with nature and how it can be beautiful. And I'll leave us with a quote from the guy that I call Tommy C, Thomas Cole, the original Hudson River School guy. So he writes in his essay on American scenery. By the way, if you go to the Thomas Cole history site, they cut this out. They have this AI thing where Thomas Cole reads sections of the essay on American scenery. For some reason, they don't read this part. I don't know why. So he writes, on the margin of that gentle river, the village girls may ramble unmolested, and the glad schoolboy with hook and line pass his bright holiday. Those neat dwellings, unpretending to magnificence, are the abodes of plenty, virtue, and refinement. And in looking over the yet uncultivated scene, the mind's eye may see far into futurity. Where the wolf roams, the plow shall glisten. On the gray crag shall rise temple and tower. Mighty deeds shall be done in the now pathless wilderness, and poets yet unborn shall sanctify the soil. That is my presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alex. That was cool. That was very
Thank you.
cool.
Yes, amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciated the generative AI art of Darwin in the Hudson River School motifs. That was a fun irony. I really appreciated that a lot. And also just juxtaposing the complete polar opposite paradigm of Humboldt, when you just layer what Humboldt is actually teaching the world about the nature of the universe and man's role within nature as part of nature, as a perfectible process, compared to Darwin's complete opposition to that. All of those core principles was really well done. I really love those contrasts.
Thank you.
So yeah, very useful, high value. And I got one question before we open up. You brought up very quickly the School of Landscape Architecture very quickly, and I was curious, could you say a bit more about what this is?
All I know about it, I have to research more about Olmsted, and I'm sure that's going to end up being its own thing. But this was a movement in the 1840s, and it ended around the time of Olmsted's death, where there were these people that believed that, just like with Olana, where you could create works that are, man-made, but natural and not rewilding, and but that could uplift the human soul by people coming into them, which is Central Park is the epitome of that. But Olmsted and Calvert Vaux was his longtime collaborator. They worked together on Olana and Central Park. And then actually at the end of Olmsted's life, he actually worked together with Gifford Pinchot, who was the guy that I mentioned in my presentation. So Gifford Pinchot shows up at Biltmore in Maryland, where Olmsted is kind of, living out his last days, managing the land, doing landscape management there. Gifford Pinchot shows up there, and they work together briefly. And Gifford Pinchot, walks away from that and learning nothing from Olmsted, and becomes, just becomes a cold-hearted utilitarian instead of learning the lessons from Olmsted that you wish you would have learned.
Wow.
But it all comes from that Hudson River School painting and how the Giffords were hoarding all the paintings.
Yeah, it's painful, eh? Like I know when I was preparing my presentation last year on the Hudson River School, I was shocked to see how many paintings are described that we know exist, and there's these wonderful descriptions about them. But if you want to actually see them, you can't, because, like you just said, they were purchased up by people who wanted to remove them from public view and put into vaults and basements of oligarchical manors and castles, so that even now there's probably tons of treasures that are waiting for eyeballs to be set upon them. And you got to wait sometimes and get lucky for one of these old oligarchs to die off and a janitor to clean up their basement and find these incredible Hudson River School bounties.
Well, I was saying how, Fox and I, we live in the Hudson Valley, and we have to leave the Hudson Valley in order to even see the Hudson River School because, they just have, they have some George Innes, Barbizon stuff nearby, but otherwise you have to drive all over the place to find, little collections here and there.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So yeah, if there's anybody who wants to throw a thought or a question out, we've got a little bit of time before 4 o'clock to chat a little bit. So now's the time. But everyone is on mute, so you got to take yourself off mute if you want to toss out a thought or a question to Alex. The thing about, I'll just, while people are waiting or rummaging through their minds, the other thing too with the Barbizon school, yeah, it's striking how the academic sophists have just created this narrative that the Barbizon school is the natural evolution from the Hudson River School. It just naturally just evolved and became the Barbizon school, as if there's no discontinuity or a break with principle. It's just like one thing became the other. It's a Delphic dirty little sleight of hand. And yeah. Magdalena, I see your digital hand.
Yes. Okay. So if you go back to that painting that has the trees all cut down and so forth.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this because I grew up on a farm, right? And I'm going like, okay, well, this is what farmers did in the beginning when they established their fields. They had to cut down the trees and make their fields out of it. So yeah, it's a certain utilitarian purpose. But then also, because you're building these fields or you're creating these fields where you grow food for people, it looks nice ultimately, right? So the question for me was, was this painting just kind of reminding people about how the origin of farming, or was it actually were these tree trunks left alone like that, or what's the real purpose here? I mean, that's what it reminded, the farming aspects, that's what it reminded me of, right? Yep. So anyway, that's just some thoughts I had when I saw that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would venture, and I think Worthington Whitridge did a very similar painting to that painting that I showed by Sanford Gifford. And I do think that the intention of the artist was a lot more nuanced than what the self-flagellating logging millionaire, took from it, where he saw it and he was like, oh, public opinion is going to plummet for me and my companies, and I have to buy this and keep it to myself, so that nobody gets mad at me. But I do think that the Hudson River School, like the ability for nuance was there, where people could see could raise these higher questions that you're raising, where you could see, okay, well, if we want food, we do need to cut down, so we need to clear some of these forests out of the way so we can do agriculture. But I think also they saw that even at that time, the oligarchs like the Pinchot family, they saw the danger of a binary being created, and they wanted to be in the driver's seat of that binary, and put their family in the driver's seat of how development was done, at the detriment of people like us who can think and raise nuanced questions and get creative about how to bust through some of these false dichotomies.
Have you found if there's any oh, just lost the page here. Have you noticed if there's any living painting movements right now that's sort of trying to tap into some of those attributes expressed by the Hudson River School over a century ago, or have you not encountered anything living right now?
I haven't encountered anything like that.
Hmm. I know there's the art, what is it, the Art Renewal Center, which does some interesting stuff, but
Hmm.
it still kind of like bends towards pre-Raphaelite Ruskin ideals in the topics that they choose to render into paintings. Although it's some very remarkably beautiful stuff that's not abstract and
Yeah.
not woke garbage. They're trying, but they just lack the moral ideals of a Humboldt or a
Yeah.
Thomas Cole to animate their
Yeah.
concepts.
I ran out of time. I was going to do a section on Ruskin as well in the
Okay.
pre-Raphaelite movement, but it was going to be too much. And I think Fox touched on it last week, and you talked about it quite a bit. So
Well, it can't be pulled on enough. I mean, it's just, and like you said at the very beginning, like as soon as you go into this world, there's just so much that opens up as far as vistas to explore. And I feel like so many, like you just raised so many topics that really deserve a whole composition unto themselves. So maybe a sequel that also deals with Ruskin in greater detail might be something worth exploring in the future.
yep.
Um, Max.
Yeah, hi from Austria.
Hey.
It's been very interesting to see, the view from the other side of the world, and to see how Humboldt is seen in a culture that doesn't speak German as first language. But I haven't read the book yet, so it's been a big inspiration. I already got it, his Magnus Opus, the Cosmos. Of course, I'm gonna get it in German. But that's been a big inspiration, and I enjoyed this whole presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I actually, in the course of doing this, I was reading about how Humboldt visited California, and that's why there's Humboldt County in California, because he visited there once, and they loved him so much that they named a county after him. They named a university after him there. But unfortunately, then Darwin came out, and I failed to mention in my presentation too that the year that Darwin put out On the Origin of Species, and also the year that Heart of the Andes came out by Church, that Darwin died. And Church actually was hoping to send his painting Heart of the Andes to Humboldt, because it was his magnum opus painting that he was like, the achievement of my life is based on your life's work, Mr. Humboldt. And Humboldt died weeks before he could send it, so he never got to do that. And what a shame too that Humboldt never got to respond to Darwin. Unfortunately, the timing of that just didn't work out. That Darwin was unchallenged, so a lot of evil has come out of that.
Makes you wonder if they waited till Humboldt died before they released Darwin's book, eh?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Darwin had been traveling in South America long before that. So
Yeah.
very, very possible, very possible.
Yeah, because Darwin he came up with his concepts, they say it's how the popular story goes in the 1830s, like 1838, when he was doing his tour of the Galapagos, and waited a long, like 20 years before actually publishing this thing with what's his name, Wallace, right? The Society for Psychical Research spiritualist.
Yep.
And yeah, the fact that it came out in 1858, right then, it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, and I see Luke in the chat is saying that perhaps Asia or China, they might be doing some artwork that is, in the spirit of the Hudson River School. And I would love to see that. I haven't personally seen that, but that would be very cool to learn about.
Yeah, I'd be curious also in Russia too, where there's sort of a restoration of traditional values that's going through a bit of a renaissance period on certain levels. I don't know if it's also expressing itself in the form of the St. Petersburg Academy of Painting that produced people like, I mean, there's so many amazing Russian painters of the 19th century that I'm curious, is there currently are there active painting schools in Russia that are reviving that? I never looked into it, but
No,
I wouldn't be surprised if there are.
I'm spending time in the wrong places to find out about that because, if you're on Twitter and Telegram, you're seeing the destruction of people's minds in real time, and you're not seeing these amazing works, going viral for any reason. Anything that can make people think cannot be, I would love to find that. I'm going to look into that for sure.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we got our homework cut out for us. So it's 3:54 p.m. Eastern time. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. If anybody has a pressing thought pushing against their noggin that's dying to get out of their head, now is the time to let it loose. If not, we'll round it out.
Well, I'm curious.
Oh, there we are. Okay. I knew it.
At the time the Humboldt School was thriving, was it having a noticeable social effect?
Yeah, there was a saying at the time in America that all American school children's teacher was Humboldt. His work was so prevalent and so impactful in the United States, and it's kind of this lost piece of history that I hate to make this comparison. I rack my brain to think about what would be comparable for someone my age. When I was a kid, I'd watch PBS after school, and I'd see Bill Nye the Science Guy or something, or Neil deGrasse Tyson. And these are figures where I was like, oh, this is the guy teaching me science. But back then it was Alexander von Humboldt, and his work was so widely disseminated. And he was this he was this figure that it tapped it. I think he kind of tapped into these romantic notions of exploration too, where that helped his work gain greater purchase among people. That kids looked up to him because he was this adventurer and scientist, and it was cool. So yeah, he was very, very impactful, and the release of Darwin's stuff completely destroyed all of that. It was like a nuclear bomb had been dropped on people's ability to think. It changed everything. It was a very, very, very big event when Darwin's book came out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Luc, question. Luc, go for it.
Okay. So did you come across, or did I miss this? Did you mention the group of 7 painters? We have this thing in Canada, and how this would be compared or related, or I doubt it's anything good, but maybe I don't know much. So
that's not a vein that I looked into. I had to stop somewhere with my scope for this presentation because otherwise otherwise it would consume my life. I have heard Matt mention the group of 7, but I honestly don't know much about it, and I would love to find the connections, but I'm sure they're there.
Jerry, I know that Jerry has a few impassioned thoughts on that topic. I could say for one thing that it seems like in my research of Emily Carr and the group of 7, who are like sort of these very important Canadian painters that have shaped a lot of the Canadian identity and aesthetic beginning over a century ago, they found their patronage in organizations directly tied to the Roundtable movement from the top, like Vincent Massey, and actually a member of the Macy Hart family was one of the group of seven. And I think it was designed to cut away or break away from the Hudson River School traditions while giving it giving Canada a sort of pseudo original identity. But Jerry, I know that you have an idea of like one, was it Thompson or something, who is like the potentially one redeemable member of that group, or is that worth bringing up?
Well, can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, there was a certain connection of the Hudson River School to the Montreal School of Painting, Duncanson, and I think that Pierre Baudry discussed that as you had. In Ontario, there was a similar connection. A gentleman named George Reed and one of his students, Tom Thompson, who I really like. But when he died in 1920, Lord Beaverbrook brought in this group of seven ship, which was a mystic, perversion even of the Barbizon school, that there was, I would not look at the group of seven as having any connection with the Hudson River School, except maybe to try to destroy it. But there was a certain trickle of the Hudson River School that came into Canada through George Reed, and more prominently his connection to Thomas Aiken. But the group of seven was not anything that Canada should study or be proud of. It probably belongs in the garbage can.
All right.
That's all I wanted to add for Luke.
Thank you. And Magdalena wants to remind us all to not forget about Wilhelm von Humboldt, the other amazing Humboldt who advanced a study of language that definitely played into the considerations of his brother, as well as Schiller and others. So very good point, Magdalena. Wilhelm von Humboldt, important figure to hold in mind. So Alex, any last parting thoughts? How could people follow your work?
Spacecommune.com. Look it up on Substack. We're also on Twitter, so look up Space Commune on Twitter. But yeah, I have a feeling we're going to be doing a lot more with the Hudson River School and these topics. The more I look into it, the more I see that is really important. And it's been I feel like it's a good terrain to work with, because I think so much of, as we get deeper, and I'm sure you've already experienced this quite a bit, the difference between teaching people how to think versus telling them how to think. And that is the question that keeps people up at night, when you do things that, like what we do. And we can do lots of things where we try to tell people what to think. We try to make an impact on the discourse or whatever. But teaching people how to think, that's the really good stuff. And I feel like the Hudson River School, that's why, in my presentation, I found at least 4 or 5 different British currents that were trying to undermine the Hudson River School and defang it, because it was very dangerous. It was something that was teaching people how to think and raising these higher questions using metaphor and taste. And that's the power of it. And I think there are so many lessons to be found in the study of the Hudson River School. So I want to do a lot more.
Great. Yeah. It's been a long time coming. So yeah, justice needs to be given to the Hudson River School painters who have been consciously defaced for way too long. So yeah, reintroduce some Promethean spirit there. I really appreciate you doing this. I'm sure Thomas Cole and Frederic Church and Bierstadt are also smiling from wherever they are. This is good. So guys, thank you everybody for joining us. And next week we got something good prepared as well. So we'll keep this voyage going. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.